They had a saying that all successful people work hard. But for our MC, Aimu, those who believed in such fairy tales were fools. People often claimed that everyone had the same conditions and equal opportunities, but there was a huge difference in birth, appearance, financial power, and talent. Aimu understood that these were factors beyond one's control. He remembered the saying that failure was the fault of those who didn't make an effort. However, in his view, if hard work always guaranteed results, everyone would do it. He also recalled a theory that whether someone could even make an effort in the first place was determined by genetics. But Aimu chose not to rely on such a theory. He resolved not to slack off and to never stop giving his best, thinking that at the very least he wouldn't lose to those born into better circumstances who didn't have to try. He planned to study hard, get into a good high school, and turn his life around. Ayumu's family couldn't afford to send him to cram school or buy expensive study materials. Still, he believed that studying with just one textbook was enough, and he was confident he could change his life. Later, after class, his textbook was thrown into the river. He stared at it hopelessly for a moment before retrieving the wet book and placing it back in his bag. A little while later, he arrived at their apartment building and noticed he had forgotten to bring in the laundry. He announced his return to his father, who warmly welcomed him back but then noticed he was soaking wet. Aimu explained that he had played in the river with others on the way home, joking that being popular wasn't easy. His father called him mischievous, and he replied that he must have taken after him. His father then told him he had left dinner for him and that they had gotten some new products in, asking for his opinion on them. Aimu walked toward their apartment and entered their unit, wondering what his father meant by dinner, since it was always food about to be discarded. He noticed the packed meal on the table and questioned whether it was just a convenience store bento. Still, it made him realize how important it was to succeed, for his father's sake as well. The next day, in his classroom, Aimu was taking his textbook out of his bag when a bully approached and held his nose, shouting that Aimu stank. The bully, Yasue Koji, mockingly asked if he was really using a textbook that smelled like sewage. Though they were the ones who had thrown the book into the river, Aimu just laughed in response. Yasue leaned in, still covering his nose, and teased him, saying his father's store was filthy too and that he had even splashed mud on the store's sign. Aimu was startled, remembering how his father had been cleaning the sign the day before. He realized they not only bullied him, but also targeted his father's store. Filled with anger, he pushed his desk and stood up. Yasue casually asked what he was doing, if he was trying to rebel. Aimu raised his fist, ready to strike, but of course he got his ass whopped. Yasue bent down and told him he was being cheeky, asking if he really thought he could rebel. He reminded Aimu that this was the first time he had dared to raise a hand against them, and grabbing Ayumu's collar, mocked that with a punch like that, he could never land a hit. Yasue then punched him in the face, knocking him down again. Yasue asked if he truly believed he could defy him and reminded him that his father's convenience store was a franchise of their company. Yasue added that even among the chain's outlets, Ayumu's father's store had the lowest profit margin, and that he had heard it was the most underperforming location. He mockingly called both Aimu and his father utterly useless. Aimu knew Yasue's father was the president of a nationwide convenience store chain, the parent company that operated AK Mart, and also the president of Eiko Holdings. In other words, a man his father could never stand up to. Aimu realized he could never win against Koji, the heir to Eiko Holdings. After a few more minutes of beating him, Koji and his minions walked away, leaving Aimu kneeling on the ground, both knees and elbows down, crying in pain and helpless anger. He knew that he could barely endure the insults, the pranks, the teasing, and having his belongings thrown away. But what was happening to him now was the worst of it all. It wasn't that Aimu hated it because it physically hurt. The bullying had already become a part of his daily reality. However, more than anything, what felt most miserable and humiliating to him was the thought that if only he hadn't resisted, he wouldn't have had to appear so pitiful. Suddenly, someone appeared beside him and asked if he was okay. He looked up and saw that it was Mizunashi Akiba. She told him that his face was swollen and said she would put on a band-aid. Before he could respond, she had already taken out a bandage and told him that he could rely on her if he needed anything, and that she could lend him her textbooks as well. She then assured him that she would make sure to tell them to stop. Aimu looked away and clenched his teeth before begging her not to do that. When she resisted, he reassured her that it was fine and that he was okay. She stood up and told him that she understood. He thought of himself as the worst, knowing that Mizunashi was beautiful, smart, and capable of anything. Everyone in class admired her. He couldn't believe someone like her would be kind to someone like him. He couldn't make sense of the uneasy feeling he felt. As she turned to leave, she reminded him that she hated those guys and told him to do his best, not to lose to sneaky and cowardly people. Because she liked people like him more. She walked away, and Aimu remembered her eyes. They were the eyes of someone truly looking at something. He guessed she wasn't lying. He could tell that Mizunashi truly hated them, and that meant, in her eyes, he wasn't someone on her level. He stood up, thinking that Mizunashi was really cute, and he wanted her to see him as an equal. That thought made him decide that he should try his best. Later, after class, he was in the locker room when he heard someone say, "Stop doing it." He was surprised when he recognized the voice. It was Mizunashi. Yasue responded, annoyed, calling her annoying. Aimu quickly grabbed his bag and hid himself, realizing that Mizunashi was confronting Yasue. He then heard her tell Yasue that bullying the weak was wrong. He was surprised to hear that she thought of him as weak, yet he knew that if Yasue laid a hand on her, he would have to protect her. However, he heard Yasue mockingly ask if that was so, then say she was a terrible woman. Yasue added that if someone as pretty as her acted kindly to someone like Aimu, the weakling would surely fall in love with her. She replied that there was no way that would happen and insisted that Aimu wouldn't fall for such an act. Yasue then asked if she didn't even realize it and warned her not to give Aimu false hope, because she was his fiancée. Aimu, hidden behind them, was stunned. He couldn't believe what he was hearing, especially remembering how Mizunashi had said she hated Yasue. Yasue then told Mizunashi that someone like him, the son of a major corporation, and someone like her, who came from a prominent family, were living in a completely different world than someone like Aimu. He added that only someone like him could match her in status. Before Aimu could hear more, he bolted from the locker room and continued running, far beyond the school grounds. He cried, thinking that effort was pointless, that everything was determined by talent and what one was born with. He believed he could never beat someone with looks, wealth, and talent. No matter how hard he tried, there was no such thing as being rewarded for effort. He kept running, not paying attention to where he was going, cursing in pain. Then he suddenly tripped and fell to the ground, but he didn't get up right away. Instead, he screamed that effort was worthless. Suddenly, a mask on the wall spoke and asked if it should guarantee the result. He looked up in shock and saw the mask move out from the wall. He was frozen in fear as he watched it transform into a monster, which then said that if he wished, it would give him the results of his efforts. He quickly crawled his ass back and shouted, asking what on earth it was. The creature replied that its name was Dashoku, the one who devours human laziness. Dashoku then told him that, simply put, in human language, he was like a devil. Aimu shouted back, not to lie, calling him a pervert. Calmly, Dashoku told him to look around. Aimu was startled to see a couple staring at him, frightened, as he appeared to be muttering to himself. Dashoku explained that he was the only one who could see him. Realizing this, Aimu considered that if no one else could see Dashoku, then maybe he really was a devil. Without waiting for further proof, he sprinted away, shouting that whatever Dashoku was, he was dangerous. Bro did a really smart move. He kept running, wondering why weird things always happened to him and thinking that he was truly getting the worst of it. Moments later, he reached his apartment and slammed the door shut, but just as he started to catch his breath, he screamed in fear. Someone had touched his shoulder. He spun around and collapsed to the floor when he saw Dashoku inside the apartment. In shock, he asked how Dashoku had followed him. Leaning in, Dashoku reminded him that he was like a devil and asked if Aimu believed him now. Stuttering, Aimu said he believed him and begged to be spared, but Dashoku told him not to get the wrong idea. He wasn't there to take his life. Instead, he was there to give him the results of his efforts. Confused, Aimu asked what that meant. Dashoku showed him his phone. Aimu asked when he had taken it, but Dashoku began swiping through it and, after installing something, tossed the phone back to him. Aimu shouted at him not to install weird apps, but Dashoku insisted it was necessary to fulfill his wishes. Aimu stared at him in complete confusion, then looked at the phone. A new app with a purple monster logo had appeared titled Rental Effort. He asked Dashoku what it was, and whether the icon was supposed to represent him. Dashoku cheerfully asked if it looked cute. Aimu just stared in silence. Dashoku clicked the app himself and told him to open it. Explanations began popping up on the screen. Aimu asked what it was, and Dashoku replied that it was a way to classify abilities and quantify them, making them easier for humans to understand. The app displayed Ayumu's status, and Dashoku began listing his abilities. Aimu asked if the scale was out of 100, but Dashoku replied that there was no limit. If someone was truly capable, they could have more than 100 points. Aimu sighed, saying he was totally weak. Dashoku immediately agreed and asked if Aimu seriously thought he was on the strong side. However, Dashoku assured him that it was with weak people like him that the app truly showed its value. Dashoku then asked if Aimu could make fried rice. He replied that he couldn't. Dashoku instructed him to tap the order button on the app and say, "I want to be able to make fried rice." Aimu did as he was told. The app then displayed a message. Desired effort result accepted. He felt dizzy as a loading icon appeared. Suddenly, something emerged from his phone and struck him directly on the head. The app announced, "Rental will begin now." To his shock, his body began to move on its own. He opened the fridge, took out ingredients, chopped vegetables, and began cooking fried rice. When the cooking was finished, he regained control. He took a spoonful and was amazed. It was delicious, 100 times better than a discarded bento. Dashoku asked if he understood now, explaining that this was the power of rental effort, but he added that it was only a rental. In other words, Aimu would have to repay it later. Dashoku told him to check the repayment condition. He did, and the app displayed, "Repayment, read recipes on a recipe website for 10 minutes today." A link was included. Aimu nodded, saying he understood. Dashoku explained further. He would gain the ability first and then later complete the necessary effort to make it fully his. That was the concept of the rental effort app. Aimu asked what would happen if he ignored the repayment condition after gaining the ability. Dashoku calmly replied, "You'll die." Aimu leapt up in horror and shouted, asking if that applied even to the tutorial he just completed. Dashoku casually confirmed it and added that if he hadn't read the recipes, he'd already be dead. Furious, Aimu shouted at him for installing such a dangerous app without permission. But Dashoku merely laughed, saying it was hard to take him seriously while he was eating fried rice so happily. Then, recalling Yasue's cruelty, Aimu became serious. He told Dashoku that so far, he had only used the app for something trivial like making fried rice. But he wondered, could he use it to become strong like a professional martial artist? Dashoku grinned and said yes, but warned that the amount of effort required would be extreme. A 100-kilometer run, lifting 100 kilograms 50 times for 10 sets, and more. Aimu shouted that he'd die from all that. Dashoku replied that going from 0 to top tier demanded that much effort, but if it was just to land a punch on a bully in his class, it would be much easier. Suddenly, mud splattered against his apartment window. He looked down and saw the bullies with Yasue. They threw more mud, laughing. His father came out to stop them, but they threw mud at his face too. Aimu watched in anger as they mocked his father for staying silent even after being humiliated, sneering that like father, like son, they were both too afraid to fight back. Yasue then cruelly told his father that even when his wife was taken by a company executive, he just smiled and licked the man's shoes. He asked if Ayumu's father wasn't ashamed to be alive, yet his father remained silent. Watching everything from his window, Aimu knew the rental effort app was suspicious, and if he made the wrong wish, it could cost him his life. But he decided, even if it was dangerous, he would make the bullies regret it. Even if it meant selling his soul to the devil, he tapped the app to make a wish. His father smiled and told Yasue that while he might be the heir to the parent company, he was sure his father would be disappointed if he knew what Yasue was doing. He added that he would pretend he hadn't seen anything and calmly ordered Yasue to go home. This angered Yasue even more, and he demanded to know what was with that condescending tone. He sneered that even though Ayumu's father was at the bottom, he still acted like he'd risen to the top just because he was an adult. Yasue then warned Ayumu's father that starting tomorrow, he would make Aimu suffer. He added that there was one more thing. His father wanted to open a bigger store closer to the station, and the store with the lowest sales would be shut down. Ayumu's father stood in disbelief as Yasue tauntingly asked whether it was true that their store wouldn't be able to continue if he claimed he'd been given an unreasonable lecture by some old man. In desperation, Ayumu's father hugged Yasue's foot and shouted that he only wanted to make sure his son could attend university properly. But if the store went bankrupt, he wouldn't be able to. Yasue coldly ordered him to apologize and declared that he would teach him how to show real sincerity. Moments later, Ayumu's father was completely bald and naked, kneeling on the ground and apologizing to Yasue. Yasue's friends filmed it all, laughing and shouting that there was a pervert in the store. They eventually ran off, and Yasue smirked as he looked down at Ayumu's father, saying he never wanted to become an adult like that. From his bedroom window, Aimu witnessed everything and tightly gripped his cell phone in fury. Later at the park, the bullies were laughing over the video of Ayumu's father. They joked about how it was their first time using clippers, but shaving someone's head turned out to be really fun. They then talked about doing the same to Aimu at school. But Yasue told them to stop. It would be boring to do the same thing again. He urged them to come up with something more shocking. One of Yasue's friends agreed and showed the video to some girls, but suddenly, mud splattered across his face. Everyone panicked as they turned to see someone playing with the mud. It was Aimu. He walked up to them and stopped. Yasue asked if he was planning to throw it. He reminded Aimu that he could barely throw a weak ball during dodgeball in gym class, warning him not to get cocky just because he got lucky once. But Aimu proved him wrong and threw the mud, and it landed squarely on Yasue's face. The bullies stood stunned. Aimu, however, felt proud. The old him would never have been able to do it, but thanks to his rented ability, the skill of a middle school baseball bench player, he could. Yasue, furious, demanded to know if Aimu was stupid or wanted to die. He approached him, asking how dare someone like him do that, and shouted at him to look at what he'd done to his face. He swung his fist, telling Aimu he should live in fear. But Aimu managed to dodge it, surprising Yasue. Aimu had dodged it thanks to his rented ability, the skill to defeat one middle school delinquent. He realized it was the limit of what he could handle right now. If the ability were too advanced for him, he wouldn't be able to repay it. He dashed forward, thankful that it still worked. Yasue quickly covered his face and screamed, asking what was wrong with him. Aimu tried to punch him, but Yasue dodged and kneed him in the stomach. Aimu gasped and collapsed, saliva flying from his mouth. Yasue observed that his punching technique was sloppy and his defense poor, wondering if the earlier dodge had just been a fluke. Aimu forced himself back up, realizing he had made a mistake. Though he was aware his physical abilities had increased, he wasn't used to fighting. He couldn't handle the flow of combat and wondered what to do. Suddenly, Dashoku's voice interrupted his thoughts, saying it was better not to think too deeply. Aimu turned and saw Dashoku lounging on a bar nearby. Dashoku explained that once an ability was rented, the body would remember it from that moment. It was better to act on instinct than to overthink it. Aimu asked what he meant by instinct, and Dashoku explained that if he had rented a martial artist's skill, he'd gain the ability to fight properly. But in this case, he only rented the ability to defeat a delinquent. Delinquents didn't use their heads, and Ayumu's current way of fighting wasn't one he had installed yet, so he needed to fight instinctively. Still panting, Aimu didn't really understand what instinct meant, but he decided to charge forward and threw another punch at Yasue. Yasue blocked again and countered with a punch to Ayumu's face. Staggering, Aimu bent down as Yasue launched another strike. Frustrated, Aimu swung his fist upward, wishing he could land just one hit. He poured all his frustration into that punch, and it landed. Yasue stumbles back. Aimu was glad, but Yasue's friends were stunned. One of them asked if it was for real and whether Aimu had always been that strong. Yasue, still dizzy from the punch, cursed and shouted for help, vowing to beat the crap out of Aimu. The others surrounded him. Despite the odds, Aimu told himself it was okay. With how he was now, he believed he could win. But then one of the bullies grabbed him tightly from behind. Aimu turned his eyes toward Dashoku, silently asking for help. Dashoku simply replied, "Impossible. You said one delinquent. You haven't gained the ability to fight multiple people." This left Aimu sweating bullets. A moment later, he was beaten severely and tied upside down while Dashoku laughed and teasingly said he looked horrible. Dashoku then leaned closer and asked if he was still alive. Aimu weakly replied that he was barely alive and had almost died because of some damn devil. But Dashoku told him not to blame him. It was his own fault for not setting things up so he could win against multiple opponents. Aimu responded that he understood, and, smiling proudly, told Dashoku that he didn't regret it. Dashoku was surprised by his smirk and asked if he had gone crazy. Swinging his body upward, Aimu grabbed the steel beam above him and explained that today was the first time he had fought back, and it made him happy. Dashoku asked what he was talking about and reminded him that he had lost. But Aimu clarified. Yes, he had been beaten, but they had only managed to hurt his face. He explained that after realizing he couldn't win, he focused on protecting his arms and legs, because if those were broken, he wouldn't be able to continue his daily runs or push-ups. He managed to free himself and stood up, telling Dashoku that while his face hurt, his arms and legs were still fine. He confidently declared that once he repaid the effort, he would become even stronger with the next rental. Dashoku smiled at his words, realizing that while he had initially thought Aimu was a pushover, he actually had a sharp mind, making Dashoku even more interested in him. Meanwhile, Aimu was busy thinking about the satisfying feeling of landing a punch on Yasue's face. It had been his first time hitting someone, and it felt good. Still, he was disappointed he hadn't completely beaten Yasue. He swore that next time, no matter how many opponents there were, it wouldn't matter. He shouted that he would become stronger. However, the next morning he was screaming in pain inside his room while furiously doing push-ups, aiming to complete 100 of them. He shouted to Dashoku that it was too much and asked if doing 100 push-ups was really that hard. Sitting casually behind him, Dashoku replied that it was, especially with Ayumu's skinny arms. Aimu shouted for him not to sit on his back, but Dashoku reminded him he had no physical form and shouldn't be heavy. Still, Aimu complained that Dashoku looked heavy and finally finished his 100 push-ups. Next, he moved on to his next repayment, a 10-kilometer run. He was panting heavily as he ran through the streets. Dashoku commented that Aimu seemed like the type to wake up early and sleep early. Aimu explained that if something happened at school and he couldn't run later, it would be over for him, hence why he ran early in the morning. While running, he was startled to find Mizunashi suddenly appearing beside him. At first, she didn't recognize him, but as soon as she realized it was him, she immediately asked him if she could run with him. Shyly, he agreed. She asked if he was out jogging, and he simply replied yes. She then asked if anything had happened since then, but he answered that he didn't really want to talk about it. She respected that and told him she understood. As they ran together, Aimu reflected that if she was merely worrying about him, it meant she still didn't see him as an equal. He wondered if it was because of his bad personality. He hated living while lying to himself about his feelings. After a while, he asked if he could ask her something, and she replied, "What is it?" He asked if the fiancé thing was true, explaining that he had overheard a conversation about it. She sadly answered that Yasue had been spreading it around. It was something their parents had arranged without their consent. Her father, she explained, held political influence, and Yasue's father was probably hoping for more connections, but she made it clear she wanted no part of it. Dashoku smiled upon seeing Ayumu's relieved reaction. Mizunashi added that both she and Yasue had exams to focus on, and neither wanted to be dragged down by outdated traditions. She asked which high school Aimu was aiming for. He answered that he was thinking of Sanzu High. She stared at him quietly, knowing that Sanzu High was a national school, prestigious and strict, built to produce students with exceptional talent. Top achievers from across the country gathered there. Noticing her silence, Aimu guessed that maybe Sanzu High was too much for him. Still, he confidently declared that he wanted to get into the best high school he could to make life easier for his father. Mizunashi smiled and told him it was a good ambition. She revealed that she was also aiming for Sanzu High. She then asked if he knew where Yasue was planning to go. Aimu replied that he didn't know. She informed him that Yasue was also aiming for Sanzu High. She suggested that there were other options if he wanted to get a good job, but he firmly refused. He told her he didn't need sympathy and that it would be ridiculous to change his path because of Yasue. He swore firmly that he would do things his own way. He would enter Sanzu High through his own efforts, beat Yasue, and make Mizunashi see him as an equal, not as someone to be pitied. Without realizing it, Mizunashi smiled brightly while staring at him. Half a year later, Aimu stood at the entrance ceremony of Sanzu High, confidently looking up at his dream school. He thought to himself that from now on, his high school life would begin. He then headed straight to the reception desk, where the in-charge students asked him for his student ID. He took out his cell phone and scanned his ID using it. At Sanzu High School, students were given a student handbook app that also served as an ID card, allowing access to various school services by scanning it. The student verified his information and confirmed his registration. Aimu thanked them and started walking away, but before he could get far, he noticed the in-charge students teasingly staring at him. Curious, he looked down at his student number and realized it indicated he was assigned to F class. Based on their reactions, he figured F class must be the group for underperforming students. He remembered that he had barely managed to pass the entrance exam with the help of the rental effort app. It wasn't surprising that he ended up at the bottom once enrolled. Still, he knew that the results of his efforts were guaranteed. He just needed to keep working hard and level up. He was then surprised when he noticed his ability chart. Clicking it open, he saw that with the app, he could view his abilities in numerical form. He guessed that these values were set by the school, based on entrance exam results and likely influenced by personal judgment and bias. He noticed something strange. The numbers on his school chart matched those from Dashoku's app exactly. Wondering what it meant, he tapped the chart again, but it didn't respond. He figured that the school's system functioned a little differently. Remembering that with the rental effort app he could view detailed stats, he decided to check his physique ability. He realized that his physique and martial arts skills, used when he fought Yasue, and his academic knowledge, used during the entrance exam, were all influenced by the app's rentals. It made him wonder, were the breakdown in criteria between the school and Dashoku's app truly a coincidence? Or did Sanzu High have some connection to Dashoku? Later, he waited with the other new students in the ceremony venue. The host informed them that the entrance ceremony was about to begin and introduced the chairman. The chairman stepped onto the stage and congratulated them for enrolling at the prestigious Sanzu High. However, he coldly added that was all there was to it. They were merely the top among high school students in Japan. From the perspective of Japanese society or the world at large, they were nothing but garbage. The students were stunned by his harsh words. The chairman asked if they thought he was harassing them and stated bluntly that if they felt they had enrolled in a terrible school, they were free to leave. He continued, criticizing how the country had promoted individualism without the ability to back it up, resulting in an increase in people who soaked in the lukewarm water of corruption. The chairman urged them to look across the sea. There, people fought with all they had, sacrificing everything to reach greater heights. Only those who put in real effort and aimed for more would drive the world forward. He warned them that they would never reach that level if they stayed comfortable and complacent. The chairman shouted that if they intended to live comfortably under the country's protection, they should leave. Sanzu High was for those who aspired higher. He explained that students were divided into classes based on ability, from F class to S class. He warned those in higher classes not to become arrogant, reminding them that higher classes existed only because lower ones supported them. He added that the spirit of noblesse oblige, those of higher status offering kindness to those below, was a principle they must uphold. Aimu was irritated, remembering Mizunashi's unintentional kindness, and realized they were not equals yet. The chairman emphasized that no one should neglect strengthening their own abilities. Being in S-class today did not guarantee anything. Complacency would drag them down. Conversely, even those starting in F-class could surpass others if they worked hard enough. The chairman ended his speech by wishing them all the best, inspiring Aimu to swear that he would absolutely climb to the top. Later, the students headed to their respective classrooms. When Aimu entered F class, Yasue saw him and was immediately annoyed. Yasue tripped him, and Aimu stumbled, about to smash his head against the desk, but managed to plant his hand firmly on the desk and do a gymnastic landing. Everyone stared at him in awe. Yasue was stunned. His plan to humiliate Aimu on the first day had failed. Awkwardly, Aimu apologized to his classmates for the trouble, further irritating Yasue, who noticed the other students seemed impressed by Aimu. Aimu sat down in his chair, confidently thinking that being bullied was fine until middle school, but now things were different. The following week, he truly felt how different high school was from middle school. For example, during PE, when the teacher fired the starting pistol, the students began running. Yasue took an early lead but was shocked when Aimu sprinted past him, amazing the other students and confusing Yasue. In math class, Aimu answered a difficult problem on the board with ease. The teacher praised him as the best student in F class. Proudly, Aimu returned to his seat while Yasue stared at him, both furious and baffled. After a week, during lunch break, Aimu sat on a bench to rest, feeling genuinely happy. He thought high school life was incredibly fun, unaware that a girl was hiding behind a tree, suspiciously watching and listening to him. Later after school, he was walking home with a big smile on his face, happy that he had done well at school again today. His high school debut felt like a success. He teared up from happiness, glad that he had made the effort. However, he was startled when his father appeared in front of him and asked if something good had happened. Aimu quickly replied that it was nothing, surprised to find himself already standing in front of their house. His father looked at him in confusion, making Aimu remember how, back in middle school, even when unpleasant things happened, he would pretend to be popular just to keep up appearances. But now that happiness was real, he didn't even feel the need to fake it. He headed straight up to his room, and his father called after him, telling him that once he was done upstairs, he should come down and help with stocking. Aimu replied that he would. Since entering high school, Aimu had decided to help out at their store as a part-time job. Although it was just assisting, he was paid for it. After changing into his store uniform, he thought about how a fulfilling high school life required some pocket money too. And besides, helping at the store was fun. Everything seemed to be going well. But suddenly, while working, a customer beside him dropped a pack of food and asked Aimu to pick it up. He stared at the food for a moment, wondering why the man didn't just pick it up himself. As he bent down to grab it, the man gave him an autograph in the face and threw him out of the store, causing him to land face first on the road. Trembling, he looked up and saw Yasue and the other bullies standing there with their motorcycles. Furious, Aimu realized it had been Yasue's plan all along. Yasue smirked and said it looked like Aimu was having a great time at high school, and mockingly asked if he had forgotten his place. Yasue then warned him that he would be hung up naked like before, so he should prepare himself. One of the men volunteered to handle Aimu first, bragging that he hadn't made it into high school and now had nothing but time. Swinging his fist at Aimu, the man shouted that he wanted some fun with a punching bag for the first time in a while. Seeing the punch coming, Aimu recognized it as a typical, wide-swinging street punch. Even though most of his efforts lately had gone into studying for the entrance exams, Aimu had anticipated bullying at Sanzu High and had gained some martial arts knowledge. Before the man's fist could reach him, Aimu struck with a quick straight punch, landing it cleanly on the man's face and sending him collapsing to the ground. The other bullies froze in shock. Aimu remained calm, knowing that wide, swinging punches took too much time and wasted motion, making them easy to counter with a straight punch. Yasue was startled, wondering when Aimu had learned martial arts. Trying to regain control, Yasue smirked and taunted him, suggesting he hadn't learned anything worthwhile. Suddenly, another man grabbed Aimu from behind, locking his arms. Yasue shouted that, just like last time, Aimu couldn't win against multiple opponents. Calmly, Aimu stomped hard on the foot of the man holding him. As the man cried out in pain, Aimu twisted the man's arm around forcefully, putting it behind his back and cracking it in the process. Another attacker rushed toward him, but before he could get close, Aimu kicked him hard in the chin. Hearing more movement, Aimu dragged the injured man sideways, using him as a shield to slam into the next attacker. In seconds, 4 men lay unconscious on the ground. Aimu turned and calmly stared at Yasue, who couldn't believe what he was seeing, that Aimu could handle multiple opponents and that he had grown this strong in just 1 year. Feeling a surge of confidence, Aimu shouted to himself that he could do it, he could win. Yasue throws a straight punch, and Aimu thought that if it was a beginner's punch, he could counter it with a straight punch. But before he could strike, Yasue's fist slammed into his face. Aimu staggered back, shocked at how fast Yasue's fists had become. Yasue sneered and called him an idiot, asking if he thought he hadn't changed at all. Bouncing lightly on his toes, Yasue demonstrated a boxing stance. He proudly said that he had been practicing boxing for a while now, and had gotten much stronger recently, and he was enjoying it. He then mocked Aimu, saying he thought he wanted a one-on-one fight. Aimu stayed quiet, knowing from his martial arts basics that he should observe his opponent carefully and respond, but Yasue was simply too fast for him to track. Yasue's next punch appeared almost instantly. Fortunately, Aimu managed to block it by raising his arm just in time. He tried to calm himself. telling himself that Yasue was strong. But he had the rental effort app on his side. However, he quickly realized he didn't have time to pull out his phone in the middle of a fight. As Yasue's fist launched toward him again, panic set in. Unable to block it properly, he took the punch full force in the stomach and collapsed to his knees in pain. Yasue turned his back to him, calling him pathetic for not even being able to lift his head. Laughing loudly, Yasue walked away, taunting Aimu that he should now know his place. Still kneeling, Aimu quietly pulled out his phone and began searching. He didn't care what kind of effort he had to pay as the price because he needed it to take Yasue down. He then asked the app for dynamic vision capable of seeing a boxer's punches and immediately accepted it without knowing its price. Yasue stopped walking when he felt a strong presence behind him and peeked back. Yasue easily dodged his sneak punch and teasingly told him that it looked like he was still ready to fight. Yasue then warned him that he would beat him to a pulp as many times as he liked. Raising his fist, Yasue swung it at him, but he stared at Yasue's fist and dodged it. He could now see it clearly. Yasue was shocked that he managed to dodge and was even scratched in the face. Realizing that Aimu saw the punch but couldn't fully dodge it, he wondered if it simply meant the punch was just that fast. Yasue kept trying to land a punch, but Aimu continued dodging, causing Yasue to shout that until just now he couldn't even react. Yasue then jumped back to get some distance, but Aimu dashed forward and launched a punch. Yasue easily dodged it and shouted at him not to think he could land a punch against a boxer. Aimu noticed that Yasue's movements were definitely troublesome and thought it would be difficult to attack and land a hit. However, as long as he could dodge, it would be alright. After dodging another of Yasue's punches, he saw an opening and managed to land a punch to Yasue's face, causing Yasue to fall to the ground on both his arms and knees. He then called Yasue pathetic for not being able to look up. Yasue tried to stand, wanting to land a punch on his annoying face, but his vision was spinning. Yasue's friends helped him up, shocked at how Aimu had suddenly gotten stronger. They rushed back to their motorcycles and drove away. When they were gone, Aimu allowed himself to sit down and lay flat on the ground, feeling relieved and proud that he had won, unaware that the same girl from school had been secretly watching. She was impressed that even when multiple bullies came at him, he fought head-on and won, though she had expected no less because she already thought he was amazing. The next day, Yasue didn't come to school and his classmates were talking about it, mentioning Yasue's horrible personality. His absence made the class feel peaceful. Aimu was surprised by his classmates' harsh words and wondered if he was too nice, as he couldn't help but feel a little sorry for Yasue. However, he decided it was fine and told himself not to worry about Yasue. He needed to focus on repaying the abilities he had rented. Checking the app, he saw that his repayment condition was to do 8 sets of exercises a day, with a warning that once he started, he must not stop halfway. Relieved that it was something simple, he looked around. Then he noticed a girl sitting at the next desk, realizing that if she stayed in that position, her underwear would be visible. As she raised her legs up, he panicked and looked away, but he knew he couldn't stop the repayment exercise once started. Hesitantly, he glanced back at the girl, hoping no one would notice him as he continued to count while doing his side exercises. Just as he completed the count, the girl suddenly appeared beside him, causing him to jump out of his chair in shock. The girl asked if he had been looking at a girl's skirt just now, and he immediately denied it. He recognized her. Her name was Yakumo, and she was in the same class as him, although she didn't stand out much. Seeing her up close, he thought she looked cute. Embarrassed, he looked away, scolding himself for what he was thinking and reminding himself not to let Yakumo think he was a pervert. Shouting nervously, he insisted he wasn't peeking, but Yakumo said she noticed he had been glancing over there the whole time. He admitted that he had been looking but insisted it wasn't for the reason she might think. Yakumo stared at him quietly before simply replying that if that was the case, then it was fine. She walked away, leaving him thinking how close it had been. She almost thought he was a pervert. He realized he needed to be more careful, as a misunderstanding could turn into a big problem. Later, after school, he was at the family store. When the customers were gone, he looked around and thought it was a good time to continue his repayment. However, he was startled when a customer appeared in front of him holding a snack to check out. He quickly scanned it and looked up to see that it was Yakumo. He told her the price, 148 yen, and she responded that she would pay in cash. As she placed the payment in his hand, he noticed there was also a piece of paper. She whispered that it was her number and said that if he didn't want it, he could just throw it away. As she walked out of the store, she added that if he read it, he would definitely want to contact her. Blushing, he wondered if the fact that Yakumo had given him her number meant she liked him. Thinking that it might finally be his time to shine, he excitedly opened the paper, but was shocked to read a note instead asking if he had made a deal with the devil. He froze, stunned, wondering if Yakumo was referring to Dashoku. Did she know all his abilities came from the rental app? If she did, and if she exposed it, it would be a disaster. Panicking slightly, he peered outside to catch a glimpse of her, wondering just what her real intention was in approaching him. The next Saturday, he entered a restaurant and sat down. Dashoku asked him if it was a girl, because he seemed pretty fired up. Blushing, he replied that it was a girl, but it wasn't as great as Dashoku might think. He then reminded Dashoku that he had told him about her before, and Dashoku recalled that she was the girl who might have noticed his presence. He explained to Dashoku that Yakumo must be a devil contractor like him. Dashoku replied that he was only visible to those he intentionally wanted to be seen by, but added that it was basically, which confused him. He asked Dashoku if that meant there were exceptions. Dashoku answered that if Yakumo had made a deal with another devil, then she must already be certain of their existence. Realizing the situation could be unpredictable, he knew he had to stay alert. Someone then opened the restaurant door, the bell ringing, and Yakumo spotted him sitting in the middle. She approached brightly and asked him what was up. He waved back and assured her that he had just arrived too, the number 7 phrase he had always wanted to say at least once, and he finally said it, albeit awkwardly. As she sat down, she immediately asked him if contacting her meant he really had made a deal with the devil. He hurriedly replied that it wasn't like that. He just wanted to clear up the misunderstanding. Looking away, he asked her what was with the whole devil thing, insisting there was no way something like a devil could exist. She pointed at him, raising a finger, and asked who was standing there, startling him. He immediately looked toward where Dashoku was standing, but she had pointed in the opposite direction. She asked why he looked the wrong way when she pointed elsewhere. Realizing he had messed up, he wondered if she had deliberately pointed late to trick him. She laughed and reassured him that it was okay, that she wasn't planning to do anything to him, and that she didn't care whether he had made a deal with the devil. She just wanted him to tell her if he knew anything. Panicking, he wondered whose side she was really on, but without a choice, he admitted she was right. She gently told him she understood. It was hard to suddenly tell the truth, especially when they had just met and she knew nothing about him either. Deciding to show her cards first, she explained why she was certain of the existence of devils. She said it was because Sanzu High was a school ruled by devils. She had a sister 3 years older than her, a brilliant girl who had ranked first in national mock exams with exceptional academic and athletic abilities. She had been an older sister Yakumo truly admired. Her sister had entered Sanzu High and became a top-tier student in the highest class, the S class. They all celebrated, believing her future was secure. However, after the graduation ceremony, her sister returned completely changed, as if her soul had been drained. One day, her sister repeatedly said that there were devils, that devils had taken everything from her. Wanting to find out what had happened, Yakumo had enrolled in Sanzu High herself. Yakumo teared up, but apologized, explaining she couldn't speak about her sister without getting emotional. She insisted she was sure devils existed because her sister said so. He felt saddened hearing her story. Yakumo continued, telling him that she suspected a secret lay within the special school building, where only S-class students were allowed, and that she planned to uncover it. She wanted to make the school pay for what it had done to her sister. She even shouted that she would sell her soul to a devil if it meant achieving that goal. Knowing that he had made a deal with the devil and gained special powers, she asked him to rely on those powers and begged him to aim for the S-class alongside her. He placed his empty cup on the table and told her that she didn't even have to ask. He had already planned to aim for A-class to prove something to someone. He wanted to prove to her that he was her equal. He added that while chasing after her, she would continue putting in the effort, and he was sure she would make it to the S-class. He too would aim for the top of the school because he had to, and S-class was just the first stepping stone. He then offered his fist to her, suggesting they cooperate. Excited by his words, she thanked him and grabbed his hand, suddenly shouting that she liked him, which caught him completely off guard. Blushing, his soul practically left his body, unable to believe what he had just heard, and he wondered what it truly meant. He decided he would have to search it on WikiWiki later. Just then, the waiter arrived with their order of souffle pancakes. Yakumo excitedly exclaimed that the pancakes looked delicious. When the waiter placed the plates on the table, she immediately took a bite and shouted happily that she loved it. Meanwhile, he was still busy sorting through his thoughts, eventually concluding that maybe she just really loved pancakes. She then asked if helping her meant the devil was there. He confirmed it while taking out his phone, wondering if he should properly explain everything. He didn't think she was the type to spread rumors without reason. He was about to explain the rental effort app to her, but just then, his phone rang. It was a call from his father. Excusing himself, he answered and was shocked by what he heard. He immediately headed home and asked his father what he meant by his earlier words. However, a man threw the question back at him, telling him that it was his line. There, he saw his father with Yasue and another man. The man put away his cigar and asked if it was true that he had been bullying his son. Aimu, confused, asked what he was talking about. But the man shouted at him not to talk back and then showed him undeniable evidence. A video recording of him bullying Yasue, which shocked him completely. He watched the video the man showed him and saw that in the footage, Yasue was the one surrounded and bullied, while he appeared to be the one holding Yasue. The man then lit another cigar and asked if he was still claiming he hadn't bullied Yasue even with that evidence. Instead of answering, he asked the man back who he even was, surprising the man, who sarcastically remarked that his father had done a fine job raising him. The man introduced himself as Yasue's father, Yasue Kune, and the president of Eiko Holdings, the parent company of Akmart, where his father worked. Aimu was stunned. The man wasn't just powerful, he was the president of Akmart's parent company, and the intimidating aura around him was palpable. His father, Shuichi, then asked Aimu if the footage was real. Aimu firmly replied that he hadn't done anything like that and was about to explain that Yasue had actually been the one bullying him. But Kune angrily shouted for him to be quiet. Kune accused him of blaming the victim and asked how far he was willing to go. Infuriated, Aimu snapped back, asking if Kune even knew Yasue's true nature, insisting that Yasue had done countless terrible things to him. Kune coldly asked where his evidence was, pointing out that the evidence of Aimu bullying Yasue was already right there, and demanded to know where the evidence to support Ayumu's claims was. Aimu clenched his fists tightly, seething with anger, as he caught Yasue smirking at him from behind Kune. Shuichi then asked Aimu again if he truly hadn't done anything. Aimu reaffirmed that he hadn't. Trusting his son, Shuichi turned to Kune and said he believed Ayumu's words and would gather testimonies from other students to investigate the matter further, asking for some time. Kune snuffed out his cigar, then suddenly threw the ashtray at Shuichi's face, startling them both. Shuichi stumbled backward and fell off the chair, causing the table to clatter around noisily. Kune then arrogantly told Shuichi that it seemed he didn't understand his place. Shuichi shouted back, asking what Kune thought he was doing and calling it an act of violence, but Kune only sneered, asking mockingly if Shuichi wanted to report him, and whether he understood how the world worked. Kune reminded them that he had graduated from the prestigious Sanzu High School as an S-class student and had been achieving social success ever since. He then coldly asked who they thought the police would believe, someone like him or people without any social credibility to speak of. Turning to leave, Kune informed them that the settlement fee would be 3 million yen and that their franchise contract with Akmart was terminated as of that day. He mockingly advised them to remove the store sign quickly and start job hunting, then left, leaving Aimu and Shuichi behind in frustration. After the incident, Aimu reported Kune to the police, but just as Kune had said, the police didn't take it seriously and the case was covered up. Shuichi was forced to borrow money for the settlement, and without Akmart's support, they could no longer continue running the convenience store. Though the building and equipment were still usable, Shuichi started a bakery. However, making a living solely from a bakery proved difficult, and their family's financial situation worsened by the day. Aimu realized that at this rate, they might not even be able to pay the phone bill. If he lost his smartphone, he wouldn't be able to use the rental effort app anymore. He knew he needed to find a way to break out of the situation and began to wonder if he should use rental effort abilities to make the bakery successful. He pulled something out of his bag, a set of word cards, and stared at them, wondering what kind of effort he should rent to ensure a prosperous business. While he was deep in thought, someone approached him. It was Yakumo. She asked if he was okay, mentioning that she had noticed he had been eating plain udon a lot lately. She offered to treat him to something, knowing that their convenience store had gone out of business, but he politely declined, saying he would manage on his own. Suddenly, they overheard some classmates talking loudly about a girl named Ichinos, the number one from C class, and how erotic she was. Yasue praised one of the nerds for being helpful, and the nerd responded, satisfied, that he had tried his best. The group then discussed whether the material could be sold for a high price, amazed at how easily money could be made. Yakumo turned to Aimu and said those men were the worst, adding that Yasue was definitely up to something perverted again. She asked if Yasue was the one he had beaten up, the one who had taken leave from school for a while, and suggested that he should beat Yasue up again now that he had new followers. Aimu simply stood up and replied that he would pass, because violence wasn't the answer. He walked away, leaving Yakumo confused. A little later, outside the school gates, he checked his wallet and saw that it was nearly empty. Suddenly, someone called out to him. He turned to see a man, one of Yasue's gang members, who commented that he had heard Aimu was having money troubles. Aimu quickly denied it. The man then grinned and said there was a good way to make money, asking if Aimu might be interested. But he simply replied that he was a Buddhist, making the nerd Noro shout at him that it wasn't a religious invitation. He responded that he wasn't interested in seminars either. Noro shouted that it wasn't a pyramid scheme and asked if he was right in assuming that he was being bullied by Yasue and his group and that now his family was in a tough spot. He realized that people knew quite a bit about his situation and figured that Yasue must have spread it around. He then asked Noro what if he agreed, and Noro replied that he couldn't really say it out loud, but hinted he was doing something that earned quite a bit. Noro then showed him a sexy picture of a girl and whispered that it was Takahashi Manami from their class. Leaning closer to the phone, he was surprised to see her in a sexy swimsuit. He immediately looked away, asking Noro why Manami was doing gravure work, and if she really had such a good figure. Noro laughingly replied no, and explained that the photo was fake. Nowadays, with image editing software, they could easily create something like that. He said he had found the body photo online and just swapped the face with Manami's. He asked Noro if it wasn't wrong, and Noro replied that it was a bit of a gray area if he was asking whether it was good or bad, but technically it wasn't illegal. This made him feel suspicious, wondering if that was really true. Noro then told him that such photos could be sold for a high price. He asked the nerd who would buy something like that, but Noro just asked him back if he didn't know about the 7 great clans. He replied that he had heard of clans in games and asked what it meant here. Noro realized that he didn't know and explained that Sanzu High encouraged competition, but also encouraged cooperation and domination, allowing students to form groups among themselves. Noro added that students could create their own organizations, called clans, and that there were 7 great clans mainly composed of A and S-class students. He asked Noro if that was what the 7 great clans were, and Noro confidently replied yes. Noro then explained that the 7 great clans were expert groups in the evaluation criteria of the school: logic, language, knowledge, physique, martial arts, art, and charm. The clans were Logic Clan, Labo, Language Clan, Union, Knowledge Clan, Library, Physique Clan, Ichirinkai, Martial Arts Clan, Lion King Alliance, Art Clan, La Forêt, Charm Clan, Honey's Nest. Noro also informed him that the 7 great clan families were wealthy and that many students belonged to them. Through connections with alumni, students could land well-paying part-time jobs. Even though they were students, there were many rich people, which meant they would pay a high price for sexy photos. He asked Noro if such high-ranking people would really want some vulgar idol photoshops, but Noro just asked what he was talking about and told him that no matter how talented people are, in the end, humans are just animals and can't win against sexual desire. Noro then asked how about it. Was he starting to get interested? He thought for a moment and instead of replying directly, asked Noro if it would be alright for him to watch him while he worked. Noro gladly agreed. He decided to follow Noro, knowing that although everything about Noro seemed a bit shady, it was one of the 7 great clans where S-class individuals gathered. Getting close to them might be necessary if he wanted to rise to the top within the school. A moment later, they arrived at a building flying the flag of the Lion King Alliance clan. There, he saw creepy-faced students staring intensely at him. He panicked and asked Noro what the hell this place was, but Noro calmly replied that it was the old building of Sanzu High, customized by the Lion King Alliance to match their taste. He disagreed with Noro because no matter how he looked at it, it resembled a delinquent hangout. He asked Noro if the school allowed it. Noro explained that it was a misunderstanding, saying the school was merit-based and held no biases, and that, at the very least, everyone there far exceeded the overall stats of F-class students like them, at least in terms of martial arts stats. He kept his mouth shut, realizing that just like Yakumo had said, Sanzu High was something else. He wondered if people like them actually paid properly. Suddenly, one of the men recognized Noro and approached him. The man whisperingly asked Noro if he had gotten a new one, to which Noro replied yes, saying it was Ichino's from C-class. Noro then showed him the sexy picture of Ichino's, and the man excitedly said it turned out really great and that it would do for tonight. The man then thanked Noro and asked if he could pay with Nyam Pay, which Noro accepted. The man added that their boss had instructed them not to do pathetic things to normal people, and that if they wanted something, they had to pay the price their boss had decided. They had no choice but to follow. He wondered if the person the man called their boss was the leader and guessed that even delinquents had their boundaries. He was then startled when he felt a strong presence behind him. Peeking back, he saw a man with an overwhelming aura. The man's eyes looked sharp enough to kill, making him wonder if he had somehow angered the man or if he was upset about Noro's business. However, the man simply walked past him and called out for someone to spar with him, saying he was at the committee and that it was getting late. The men around immediately agreed respectfully. Noro explained that the man was Dosaka Shido, the leader of the Lion King Alliance clan. Noro added that rumor had it Shido once killed a bear with his bare hands. He was an S-class student, and Shido's total stats were 525. Startling him when he realized it was 6 times his own total stats. He thought that worrying about whether he had angered Shido was far too presumptuous. To someone like Shido, he was completely insignificant. He then whispered to himself that Shido had won, which confused Noro, who asked if he was alright. He replied yes and told Noro not to worry about it. Later, they stood back in front of the school's main gate. Noro proudly told him that he had made 50,000 yen that day alone and asked him what he thought about it, saying that if he did the same, he wouldn't have to eat udon every day. However, he told Noro to forget about it because he never intended to make money through such a vulgar business in the first place. Noro was confused by his words, so he explained that he had followed Noro because he wanted to see one of the 7 great clans, not because he wanted to join the business. Still, he admitted he didn't have a solution for his money issues yet. Noro then asked what he meant by that, and he replied that he had been forced to pay a high settlement fee based on a fabricated bullying video. If he could prove that the video was fabricated, he could countersue. Recently, he had been working hard searching for evidence to prove the fabrication. He then told Noro that he had been keeping an eye on him the entire time and asked if it was true that Noro had created the fake video, startling Noro. He also told Noro that he was someone who had the skills to even fake graver photos of girls and that he was the only one near Yasue who knew how to do it. Noro agreed with him, realizing that he had figured it out. He then asked Noro if he was right that Yasue had asked him to invite him, and if they had planned to pin the blame on him again if he got involved in buying and selling fake photos, laughing about it afterward. He told Noro that he knew exactly what they were thinking. However, Noro shouted that it wasn't like that and admitted that, while it was true he was ordered to fabricate the bullying video, He had never imagined it would ruin his family like that. Ever since then, he said, he had seen it in his dreams. He even dreamt of Aimu and his father standing at his bedside cursing at him. Angrily, he shouted at Noro that both he and his father were still alive, so he shouldn't kill them off. Noro said he was worried that what happened might cause them to commit suicide, and he couldn't get the guilt out of his head. He couldn't sleep at night. Noro added that he might not be able to do much, but he thought at least if they could start earning, it would help. He sighed in frustration and told Noro that he didn't want to make money in such a dirty way, and if Noro thought it was some kind of atonement, he was completely off track. Noro agreed with him and assured him that he would confess to Yasue's father that the video was fabricated. However, Aimu turned around, telling Noro not to do it because it was fine. Still, Noro persisted in trying to fix his mistake. Aimu shouted again that it was fine, but Noro grabbed his arm to stop him from walking away, saying that it wouldn't work like that. Pushing Noro's hand away, he shouted at him for being so persistent, causing Noro to fall to the ground. He then shouted that if Noro had been able to go against Yasue's will, he wouldn't have fabricated the video in the first place, making Noro speechless with tears welling in his eyes. Aimu then calmly told Noro that he understood because he was also bullied, and if he went against Yasue, things would only get worse. He turned around and assured Noro that he would find a part-time job himself. Later, Aimu was accepted as a part-time worker at Hamburger Busters. Mizunashi appeared, praising the other employees for doing a good job, and asked if there was a new recruit. The man replied that there was, and it seemed the new recruit attended the same high school as her. She then approached to greet the new recruit, and both were surprised to see each other. The man told her that Mizunashi was 1 month ahead of him and that he would be in the kitchen, asking her to make sure she taught him properly, leaving them both speechless. A moment later, Mizunashi took customer orders and headed straight to the kitchen to submit them, while some male customers pervertedly stared at her. Aimu accepted the customers' orders and began preparing them, thinking that he could learn manual cooking easily thanks to his rented effort. The app then displayed the repayment conditions while he thought about how convenient it was. After a few minutes, he finished preparing the burgers perfectly. Everyone was amazed, impressed that someone making burgers for the first time could be that skilled, praising him for being so fast it didn't even seem like his first day. He shyly laughed at their compliments and replied that he was good at that kind of thing. Mizunashi, proudly smiling, took the orders and felt pleased seeing him doing so well. Later, when there were no customers and he was busy cleaning plates in the kitchen, Mizunashi asked him how things were going. He replied that thanks to her, everything was going smoothly. She then asked why he had chosen that place, jokingly suggesting it was because of the uniform, startling him. He immediately denied it, explaining that the shop was close to the school, accepted high school students, and offered a high hourly wage, so it had been the only viable option. She told him they were alike and asked if she was right in assuming he wanted to work efficiently where he could earn the most. He agreed, saying that was exactly what he wanted because he wanted to focus on efficiency, making her laugh. However, he pointed out that they weren't exactly alike. He knew that if Mizunashi was from A class, she could easily get a high-paying job through a referral from one of the 7 great clans. He could understand that for a guy, but he guessed a girl wouldn't necessarily need to work at a place like that. Suddenly, Yasue entered the shop with his gang, startling Aimu. Yasue confidently announced that he had come to hang out and boasted to his gang that Mizunashi was his fiancée and that she was sexy. He approached Mizunashi, trying to touch her, but she pushed his hand away and firmly told him to sit down and place their orders. However, Aimu intervened, telling Yasue that troublemaking customers were kindly asked to leave. Surprised to see him, Yasue asked why he was there. Mizunashi replied that Aimu was working part-time at the shop and, unlike Yasue, he was a reliable boy. Yasue shouted that she was getting full of herself and raised his fist to strike Aimu. Mizunashi calmly told Yasue to go ahead and hit him, but warned that the moment he laid a hand on Aimu, she would immediately call the police. She even showed her phone with the emergency number ready, causing Yasue to hesitate. Frustrated, Yasue cursed loudly, then told his gang they were leaving. Once they were gone, Mizunashi thanked Aimu and told him he had become pretty dependable. She then teasingly asked if he had gotten a girlfriend, but he replied he hadn't and muttered that it wasn't like she was his girlfriend, while thinking of Yakumo, whom he had been speaking to often lately. Meanwhile, outside, Yasue angrily kicked over a trash can and asked his gang if it was true that Aimu was getting close to a girl. One of them confirmed it was Yakumo, calling her a bit of a misfit but someone who would definitely attract perverts. The man then asked Yasue if they should kidnap Yakumo to make Aimu understand. Yasue agreed and ordered him to call Noro so they could arrange a real photo shoot. Hours later, Hamburger Busters had closed and everyone was heading home when Mizunashi asked him if he was going to the station and suggested they walk halfway together. He agreed. They were about to start walking when he received a message. Looking at it, he didn't recognize the account. A man named Suk had texted him that Yakumo had been invited to a venue. Before he could fully grasp the situation, his phone rang. Mizunashi told him he could answer it, so he accepted the call. He asked who it was, but a man wearing a mask appeared on the screen and asked if he could see him. The man greeted him and said he must be wondering what was happening all of a sudden. Then, the man proudly showed off his elephant print clothing, introducing himself as Iwao Yusuke, a private adult video actor, which confused Aimu even more. Before he could ask questions, Yusuke showed Yakumo tied up and asked if she was Ayumu's girlfriend. Yusuke then shouted that this time's plan was a cuckold surprise party and invited him to appear too, urging him to come to the address he had sent. He stuttered and shouted at Yusuke not to mess around, but Yusuke calmly asked if he was refusing to appear. Yusuke warned that if Aimu didn't come, he would proceed with a hardcore recording instead. He threatened that if Aimu called the police, Yakumo could end up dead, and told him he would see him in an hour before ending the call. Aimu wondered how Yasue could stoop so low, but he knew that wasn't the issue at hand. He turned around and apologized to Mizunashi for leaving. However, she grabbed his hand tightly and warned him it was dangerous. He replied that even if it was dangerous, he had to go alone because if he contacted the police or anyone else, Yakumo would be in greater danger. He asked her that if anything happened to him, she should explain everything to his father. Forcefully pulling his arm away despite Mizunashi's protests, he sprinted off, leaving her whispering that she couldn't just ignore it. Moments later, he arrived at the address Yusuke had given and barged inside, shouting that he had arrived and to stop doing such horrible things to Yakumo. Dashoku, who had been watching from behind, wondered what was happening. Yasue, standing next to Yakumo, who was tied up, greeted him. As he suspected, it was all Yasue's plan. Yasue explained that he wasn't the main planner, someone else was, and asked Yusuke if that was correct. Yusuke proudly introduced himself, thanking Yasue for bringing a promising actress and saying he expected nothing less from the heir of Eiko Holdings. Iwao Yusuke, a B-class second-year student at Sanzu High, shamelessly showed off his naked body, causing Aimu to gape in shock. He shouted at Yusuke, asking what was wrong with him and why he was completely naked. Yasue told him not to mock Yusuke, claiming that despite appearances, Yusuke was overwhelmingly above them in rank. Yusuke flexed his muscles, bragging that his muscular beauty had been honed through his adult film experience and that his combat skills were exceptional. Although he couldn't match Shido, Yusuke claimed to be an executive among the 7 great clans and insisted Aimu show respect to his senior from B-class. Aimu couldn't believe that someone like Yusuke was a B-class executive and questioned if Sanzu High School was really okay. He then noticed Noro was there too, confirming that Noro was indeed one of Yasue's crew. Yasue warned him not to underestimate Yusuke, but Aimu, unfazed, punched Yasue in the face and shouted at him to let Yakumo go. Yusuke, excited, said the participants were extreme this time but that it was good, showing off again. Yusuke then announced they should start the cuckold surprise party, adding that he needed to beat up the boyfriend first. Shouting excitedly, Yusuke approached him, saying they could skip the interview part and go straight to the beating, ordering Noro to start recording. Aimu clenched his teeth in panic but reassured himself that he had learned how to fight. If he treated it like he had with Yasue, he could win. However, he froze in fear when he realized how huge Yusuke was, and we can clearly see from the shadow. Yusuke threw a punch at him, but fortunately, he managed to dodge. He noticed that Yusuke was a whole size larger and had a longer reach, meaning that even if he dodged, he couldn't easily counterattack. Dashoku watched, analyzing the situation. He recognized that in boxing terms, Yusuke was in the heavyweight class, while Aimu would barely qualify for featherweight or bantamweight. Once the weight class changed, it was practically a different sport. Dashoku smirked, noting that with Yusuke's reach, Aimu couldn't even counter his jabs. Meanwhile, Aimu kept dodging Yusuke's punches, thinking he might be able to land a hit to the solar plexus. He narrowly avoided an uppercut and prepared to counterattack, but before he could close the distance, Yusuke kneed him in the stomach. Teasingly, Yusuke told him there was no opening. However, Yusuke was surprised to see that Aimu had managed to block his knee. Asking if he had really blocked it, Yusuke said he didn't mind a slow, tense fight, but it was interfering with his plan to introduce the adult video. Yusuke then called over to Noro, telling him that from now on, every time Aimu dodged or blocked an attack, Noro could lick Yakumo's body. Aimu was horrified, but Yusuke added that if Aimu dodged 10 times, Noro could take Yakumo's virginity, causing Noro to tremble in fear. Left with no choice, Noro agreed. Aimu shouted at them to stop, but Yusuke insisted it wasn't Noro who needed to stop, it was Aimu. All Aimu had to do was not dodge. Yusuke shouted that it was finally getting fun and ordered Noro to resume filming as the cruel game was about to begin. Yasuke then reminded him that dodging and blocking weren't allowed, unless he was okay with Yakumo being licked all over. Yasuke punched him in the face, making him tremble in pain. Yakumo tried to shout and worry, but Yasuke simply told him that he could do whatever he wanted. Aimu glared at Yasuke, prompting Yasuke to laughingly tell him to stop and ask why he was making that face. After all, he was the one hitting, but it looked like it hurt him too. Yasuke punched him again in the face, causing his mouth to bleed. Aimu knew it was bad. Each punch was too heavy, and if he didn't guard himself, he could be killed. But when he looked at Yakumo tied up hopelessly, he hesitated. Yasuke then punched him in the stomach, making him cough up blood and scream in pain. Yasuke, satisfied by his reaction, let him collapse to the ground. Yasuke then shouted that the opening act was over and they should move on to the main event, the cuckold scene. He turned to Noro and pointed out that Noro was Ayumu's friend, saying that being cuckolded by a friend made for the best script. Yasuke told Noro that he would give him the right to take Yakumo's virginity, encouraging him to play with her. Noro, trembling, glanced at Yakumo, clearly wanting to refuse but too afraid to speak. Yakumo, struggling, looked at Noro with tears in her eyes, leaving Noro speechless. As he approached her, Yakumo was terrified when Noro grabbed her belt. She closed her eyes in fear and called Ayumu's name, but then she felt one of her hands come free. Noro removed the gag from her mouth and whispered that he would let her out. She asked him why, and he awkwardly laughed, replying that it was only natural to think that way. Noro freed her other hand and admitted that until now, he had been involved in wrongdoing just to protect himself, because he didn't want to get hit. He said that no matter what excuses he made, he had done unforgivable things that couldn't be erased by apologies. He admitted that he was a worthless bastard, but shouted that he couldn't bear to sink any lower and didn't care anymore if he wasn't forgiven. He just wanted to change, even a little. Noro then sprinted away with Yakumo, shouting that they should run. Yasuke, stunned for a moment, shouted after them in fury, calling Noro a bastard and demanding to know what he was doing. Yasuke chased after them, taunting Noro for getting flustered in front of an actress and asking if he didn't think it was rude. Noro and Yakumo hid behind some boxes as Yasuke ran around looking for them. Meanwhile, Aimu managed to sit up, wondering why Noro had done it. But he quickly told himself it didn't matter right now. Thanks to Noro, he was saved. He decided to rent a new ability and prepare for a counterattack, though he wasn't sure yet what ability he needed to defeat Yasuke. On the other hand, Noro and Yakumo tried to hide, but they were found by Yasuke. They immediately bolted, and Yasuke chased them down, teasing that he wouldn't let them escape. Noro pulled a chain he was holding, calling Yasuke an idiot because he was purposely waiting there. The chain on the ground suddenly straightened, causing Yasuke to trip. He realized too late that it was the same chain that had been binding Yakumo. Falling forward, Yasuke saw nails and screws scattered on the floor, but it was too late to avoid them, and he flopped onto the sharp debris. Yasuke screamed in agony. Aimu watched, realizing that such a massive body crashing down would take heavy damage. Yasuke's nakedness only made it worse. Aimu concluded that being tall and heavy amplified the impact of falling, and from there, he finally figured out the ability he needed to defeat Yasuke. He immediately requested it from the rental app. Meanwhile, Noro and Yakumo kept running for the exit. Noro urged her to hang in there, saying they were almost out. She nodded in agreement, but just as they reached the exit, Yasue and his gang blocked their path. Yasue asked mockingly where they thought they were going. He called Noro a bastard for betraying them and said there was no way they could escape. At that moment, Yasuke caught up with them, praising Yasue for stopping the escape. Yasuke then furiously pointed at Noro, declaring that he would mess him up first. However, before Yasuke could act, he felt a strong presence from the side. Before he could dodge, Aimu landed a punch to his ribs. Yasuke brushed off the hit and teased Aimu, asking why he was still alive. He sneered that with a punch that light, Aimu couldn't take him down. And besides, everything had already been recorded. But Aimu calmly called him a pervert and confidently told him not to worry. He had already rented the power to defeat him. At the same time, Yasue slowly approached Noro, telling him there was no way he would let him escape, making Noro worried. Still, Noro tries to defend Yakumo. Fortunately for them, a lady appeared and told Yasue that the one who couldn't escape was him. Yasue looked back, surprised to see Mizunashi, who was filming everything on her phone. She told Yasue that she couldn't believe he'd resorted to criminal acts, but that she needed to thank him, because thanks to this, she could break off their engagement without any worries. Yasue, stuttering, asked her what she was talking about and if she was trying to ruin his parents' reputation. She calmly asked him back which one of them was actually ruining it. Teasingly, Yasue told her that even his father had an image to maintain, and that there was no way he would release a video like that to the public. She asked if he meant Kunai would cover it up, but Yasue replied no. He would destroy the video himself. Realizing Yasue was planning to destroy the evidence by force, Mizunashi sighed in frustration. She told Yasue that he must have underestimated her and asked if he really thought he could beat her in a fight. Meanwhile, Aimu faced Yasuke. Yasuke commented that Ayumu's stance was different now, meaning he realized he couldn't win in a fistfight. Yasuke tried to punch him, shouting that their size difference still hadn't changed. However, Aimu managed to dodge Yasuke's fists, realizing that if he tried to guard head-on, he would simply lose stamina. He knew he had to focus on dodging because there was no other choice. Aimu speedily dodged every punch Yasuke threw, trying to find a way to get into Yasuke's range. He realized he had to overcome the difference in reach and footwork. Looking around for anything useful, he decided he had no choice but to give his plan a try. He ran away from Yasuke and pushed a box full of screws, nails, and other small tools onto the floor. Yasuke, confused, asked what he was planning. Aimu replied that it was like caltrops, and that since Yasuke was completely naked and barefoot, he wouldn't be able to move properly on them. Though he knew he couldn't close the reach gap, If he could predict Yasuke's footwork, there was a chance to close in. But Yasuke simply smiled teasingly and slammed his foot down onto the scattered tools without hesitation, driving screws and nails into his foot as he tried to punch Aimu again. Aimu couldn't believe Yasuke was stepping on them without flinching. Yasuke, trembling slightly in pain, told Aimu he was a masochist and that this kind of pain was a reward for him. Seeing this, Aimu immediately turned around and called Yasuke a pervert. Yasuke was surprised by his retreat and shouted, asking if he was just running away again. Furious, Yasuke chased after him as Aimu climbed up a ladder to the second-floor storage area, yelling that when someone made a cool entrance, they were supposed to see it through to the end. Aimu ran on the second floor first, but quickly found himself at a dead end. Hearing Yasuke's voice from behind, he turned and saw Yasuke swinging his arms as he approached. Yasuke commented that in such a narrow warehouse, even if Aimu tried to escape, he would just run into dead ends and that they should settle it there. Aimu knew that if Yasuke pushed him, he would fall straight down from the high place. Trembling in fear before such a big and heavy opponent, he reminded himself that he had already rented the ability to win and needed to be brave. He raised both hands and charged straight at Yasuke, tightly grabbing Yasuke's mask and arm together, surprising him. Yasuke couldn't believe that little Aimu would come straight at him and thought there was no way Aimu could handle his weight. Yasuke tried to crush him by applying pressure. Aimu panicked at the heavy pressure but reminded himself that it was fine because the ability he rented was judo. With all his might, he pulled Yasuke's mask and arm together and executed a sweeping hip throw. Yasuke, stunned, didn't resist as he was thrown from the second floor, crashing down onto the first floor littered with small tools. He screamed in immense pain. Aimu shouted that it was settled and carefully jumped down from the second floor. He explained to Yasuke that he realized after watching Noro earlier that having a big, heavy body meant greater damage from falling, and that it was the best strategy for someone small like him to defeat a large opponent. Yasuke, trembling in pain, managed to push himself up and shouted not to think he could be beaten so easily. But Aimu quickly wrapped his arms around Yasuke's head and locked in a tight chokehold. The reason Aimu rented the judo ability was for another purpose. After knocking Yasuke down, he planned to finish him with a ground technique. Even without a collar, he could apply a chokehold known as the rear naked choke. Yasuke, realizing Ayumu's arm was perfectly locked, slowly lost consciousness, wondering how a little runt like Aimu had such a technique. As Yasuke faded out, he bitterly thought that Aimu had been hiding such strength all along. Aimu, relieved that the judo ability had defeated Yasuke, began to wonder where Yakumo and Noro were. But before he could move, he felt dizzy and started to collapse backward. Fortunately, Mizunashi appeared behind him and caught him just in time. She praised him for doing a great job and assured him that they were safe now. Surprised that she was there, Aimu wanted to ask why, but exhaustion overtook him and he passed out. A moment later, as he lay on the car, he heard the sounds of cars passing by. Slowly waking up, he asked where he was. Mizunashi, holding his head on her lap, excitedly told him that he had woken up, smiling warmly as she looked down at him. He asked her where he was and tried to sit up, but she stopped him and told him that he was not supposed to be awake yet. He then blushed, realizing that it was Mizunashi and wondering if his current position was a knee pillow. She then asked if he didn't remember and told him that after fighting the perverted guy, he had passed out immediately after, to which he agreed. She informed him that she had asked the servants at her home to bring the car for them and was planning to take him back to his place. He replied that he understood and thanked her for it. He sighed in frustration, realizing that, in the end, he had to be helped by Mizunashi and ended up showing a very uncool side of himself. He then remembered something and asked her where Noro and Yakumo were. She assured him that they had made it back safely. He asked if she was the one who defeated Yasue and saved them, to which she replied yes, explaining that it was because she was stronger than Yasue. She then took out her phone and told him that, according to the school's status system, Yasue's martial arts skill was apparently 35, but despite how she looked, she actually had a martial arts skill of 63. Suddenly, Dashoku appeared in front of him and confirmed that Mizunashi's status was accurate, showing him all her status points. Aimu blushed even more, realizing Dashoku had been there too. Dashoku laughingly reminded him that he was attached to him and told him that Mizunashi ranked high according to the school's class rankings. Aimu agreed, knowing Mizunashi was an A-class student, and there was no wonder she was strong in a fight. She then asked him if she was right in thinking that he had gotten stronger and said she couldn't believe he had taken down such a big guy. She patted his head softly and told him that he must have put in a lot of effort. He closed his eyes, feeling the warmth of her hand, and thought that being recognized like this felt so good. Even though he knew he was cheating by using rental efforts, he assured himself that he had done great. He then opened his eyes, feeling that he was forgetting something. He noticed Dashoku staring at him with a huge smile, causing him to sit up in shock and horror. Panicking, he asked Mizunashi what time it was. She replied that it was currently 11 p.m., which shocked him even more. He immediately took out his phone, knowing it was bad for him. He saw that his repayment conditions required him to apply a ground move on someone every day for 10 minutes per set, 3 sets each day for a month. He panicked even more, wondering how many more minutes there were until he got home. He thought that if they got there within 30 minutes, he could use the ground move on his father for 30 minutes. But if he didn't get home in time, he would fail, meaning he had to meet the conditions immediately. He bowed down to Mizunashi and begged her to let him perform a ground move on her, which confused her. He shouted that it might seem strange, but he had made a personal vow to himself to keep up his efforts every day, and the reason he was able to defeat Yasuke was thanks to the continuous effort he had put in. Yet today, he hadn't fulfilled his vow. He admitted that he knew how strange it sounded, but still begged her to let him do it. He knew that he would feel gross too if someone asked him something like that, and he really didn't want to be thought of as a pervert, but he hoped she would agree. To his surprise, she agreed. She told him that since she also practiced martial arts, she could handle some ground techniques. Excited that she agreed, he listened as she asked if she was right in assuming he wasn't planning anything perverted, to which he firmly replied that he absolutely was not. She told him that if that was the case, it was fine, and asked what kind of move he intended to use. He thought for a moment before replying, knowing that a joint lock for 30 minutes would definitely be painful. Instead, he chose to use a pinning ground technique. However, he immediately regretted his choice, realizing that while the pinning technique had less strain for 30 minutes, their position would inevitably look suspicious, as if he had ulterior motives. Mizunashi then mentioned that doing something like that while in a uniform felt kind of weird and asked if he was really not planning anything perverted, which he immediately swore he was not. She sighed and responded with an okay. Aimu didn't want to do anything that would crush Mizunashi's kindness, but he couldn't resist noticing how soft her body felt and the sensation of those squishy things pressing against his chest, causing his mind to almost lose control. He forced himself not to think about it, knowing that if he let strange thoughts slip, Mizunashi would definitely find out. Dashoku then appeared beside them, snickering, and said he now understood what human things were. Aimu desperately used telepathy to beg Dashoku to let him negotiate to leave the remaining 2 sets for tomorrow. But Dashoku refused, saying it was more fun this way, making Aimu scream internally, and apologized to Mizunashi in his heart because he thought she smelled so good. 30 minutes later, he released Mizunashi, relieved that he had completed today's repayment and survived. Mizunashi then told him she was surprised. He agreed and apologized, but she clarified that it wasn't about the ground move. She asked if she was right that they had just performed the judo technique called the vertical 4-quarter hold, noting that he had firmly locked it in, and it was a proper ground technique, showing that he really was studying judo. He was relieved that she wasn't offended and agreed with her. However, they soon arrived at his home, and she told him there was a lot she wanted to talk about, but it seemed that was enough for today. He thanked her warmly for giving him a ride home, and she welcomed him. She then informed him that she had given Noro the contract information related to Yasue's father, and that if Noro truly repented, by now, she thought the Yasue family would be facing a big mess. Meanwhile, in Yasue's mansion, Kune was fuming with anger when he saw Yasue, and told him they had something to talk about. Kune then asked Yasue if he already knew what it was about, terrifying Yasue. Kune then showed the fake video of Aimu bullying Yasue and asked Yasue if he was right that the video was fabricated and if Yasue was actually the one bullying Aimu. Yasue couldn't answer out of fear and just trembled. Kune then told him that he also received the video evidence as proof. Yasue tried to explain everything to his father, but Kune punched him in the face and called him a failure, telling him to shut up. Kune repeatedly punched him without caring that he was his own son, shouting that not only had he failed to get into A class, but he was also a failure in F class. As if that wasn't infuriating enough, he had even tarnished Kune's career and shown weakness. Kune shouted that Yasue was nothing but a parasite on his life and called him trash. Eventually, Kune stopped punching him when Yasue's face was bleeding heavily, but all Kune cared about was that if the issue got brought up in the weekly magazines, it would be disastrous for his reputation, and he needed to settle it somehow. The next day, Kune explained everything to Aimu and Shuichi and apologized to them for his actions. Kune told them that he had heard everything about the situation, knew what his son had done, and admitted that it wasn't their fault. He assured them that he would make sure his son never did something like that again, and that he would return all the compensation and medical fees they had received. Kune then asked Shuichi if it would be possible to put the Akmart sign back up again, and begged him to let the matter go and keep it confidential. He told Shuichi that Kune was just saying it, and asked what they should do. Shuichi approached Kune and told him to lift his head. Kune raised his head and asked if he would forgive him, but Shuichi firmly replied that he would never forgive him, shocking Kune. Shuichi then told Kune that he didn't need to return the money, and that he didn't need the Akmart sign either. Shuichi added that Kune probably thought it would settle everything, but asked him what about their lives. Shuichi said that they would forever be at the mercy of a rich person like him, but after losing everything, he had learned a lesson and would no longer work under people who treated their help like charity cases. Shuichi told Kune that he was now in a vulnerable position because of the video and advised him to live humbly from now on. This angered Kune, who furiously asked if Shuichi was blackmailing him. Kune shouted that Shuichi probably planned to sell him out to the weekly magazines and ruin him someday. Kune tried to grab Shuichi in anger, but Aimu grabbed Kune's arm and angrily told him that in the end, he was still resorting to threats and intimidation, meaning his regret was just a facade. Aimu shouted for Kune to get out. Kune tried to shake Ayumu's hand away while shouting for him to shut up, but Aimu didn't let go until his father told him to release him. Kune took his arm back and glared at them. But Shuichi told Kune to leave, just like his son said. This angered Kune even more, and when Shuichi said they didn't want anything to do with him anymore, Kune completely lost it and screamed in rage. Kune then barged out of their apartment shouting that they didn't have to tell him to leave because he would leave on his own. Aimu asked Shuichi if it was all alright and mentioned that they could clear their debt with the money. But Shuichi, laughing, replied that it was fine, saying he had already shown Aimu so many embarrassing sides of himself that he should let him look cool for once. Aimu agreed with his father and told him that he was happy to have him as his father, even like this. A few days later, in the back of the school, Noro was struggling and knew that what he had done to Aimu was wrong. Although he was threatened, what he did was truly bad and unforgivable. While Aimu was wrestling him on the floor, Noro asked if they really needed to do the joint lock every single day. Aimu just asked him back if he had a problem with it, and Noro replied that it really hurt. Yakumo, who was watching them, asked Noro if she was right that it was really refined, and informed them that 10 minutes had passed and the 3 sets were done. Aimu brightly thanked Noro and told him it was helpful. Noro couldn't believe Aimu was smiling after putting him in a hold and shouted that it was terrifying. He added that he did intend to atone for what he had done, but being called out every day for joint locks made him wonder if he was being bullied. Aimu apologized to Noro and explained that it wasn't because he hated him, but if he didn't do it, he would die, leaving Noro wondering what he was even talking about. Aimu then explained that he was trying to do it as painlessly as possible. Noro, skeptical, asked if he wasn't changing the techniques too much for someone trying to make it painless. Aimu showed his hand and replied that, since it was a rare opportunity, he wanted to try various techniques, making Noro shout, asking what he meant by rare opportunity, and what was with his hand. Noro also asked if it was also to get into S-Class, and if he was right that both of them were aiming for S-Class, and how exactly they planned to get there. Aimu replied that it seemed like all they could do was study and train their bodies, which Yakumo agreed with. However, she added that apparently, joining a clan led to a higher growth rate, and if they joined a clan, they might learn more efficient ways to grow. She then gave Aimu a drink, and he accepted it while asking her what she was talking about. Yakumo explained that there was data suggesting that if they joined one of the 7 great clans, there was a high chance they would make it to A-Class. Aimu said that it might be a good idea to look for a clan they could join. Noro mentioned that he had some acquaintances in the Lion King Alliance, but Aimu was horrified at the thought of joining them. He quickly told Noro that they should definitely not join, saying he wouldn't fit in at all. Noro agreed, understanding immediately. Yakumo then suggested they join the Honey's Nest clan, but Noro asked if it wasn't only for handsome guys and beautiful women. Aimu agreed, saying it was also impossible for them. Yakumo then suggested the Union clan, informing them that it was said to be an international and fun clan. She explained that the Union clan's leader was Romelia Rose, an incredibly beautiful, smart, and athletic woman, a perfect superhuman, and a French exchange student. She added that she had heard that Rose's clan accepted anyone who came, and she thought approaching Rose might be the best place to start. The next day, they approached Rose together to ask her about joining. Rose asked them back to confirm if they really wanted to join the Union. She then held Ayumu's hand and excitedly told them that they were more than welcome. Soon they saw Union members gathering, and Rose dragged them along, announcing to the members that they had newcomers. The members warmly welcomed them and greeted them, surrounding them excitedly with warm smiles. Aimu had heard that the Union didn't turn anyone away, but he couldn't believe how easy it was to get in. When everyone finally calmed down, he asked Rose if that place was the Union's base. Looking around, he found the campus square to be a nice environment, but still couldn't believe the Union's main base was outdoors. Rose replied that it was not the Union's base and that they were just talking there that day. She explained that they didn't have a main headquarters, and even now, not all members were gathered. She said that while other clans had headquarters to build strong bonds, the Union's members came from different hometowns, languages, and religions, so she thought they didn't need one. Yakumo then asked Rose if it was true that the Union members were really skilled in languages, and commented that Rose spoke Japanese really well. Rose replied that speaking Japanese was hard but good training, and proudly told them she was a master of multiple languages. She informed them that her native language was French, but she could also speak Spanish, Japanese, Chinese, Korean, English, and many more. 16 languages in total. They were shocked and amazed that she could speak 16 languages, making her smile proudly at them. Aimu stared at Rose in amazement and noticed that, although she was from S-Class, unlike Shido, the leader of the Lion King Alliance, Rose was not scary at all. Rose then asked him why he decided to join the Union, and if he wasn't more suited for the Lion King Alliance. He was startled by her question and asked why she thought so. Rose replied that it was because of the rumors about him. They had heard he knocked out a guy from the Lion King Alliance who was in B class. She told him that he could rise through the ranks even while being in F class thanks to his great fighting skill. He agreed that fighting was his best skill at the moment, but clarified that he hadn't defeated Yasuke like they thought. He asked if the rumors had spread that much. Rose replied that since the Union had one of the largest numbers of members among the 7 great clans, they were flexible and quick to gather information, always getting rumors from around campus rapidly. Knowing this, Aimu realized he shouldn't lie or try to deceive Rose. He admitted that he was aiming for S class, which surprised her, but he explained that it was why he wanted to improve his abilities and was looking for a clan that could help him grow. He then bowed his head and sincerely apologized for coming to a language-focused clan even though he couldn't speak English. Rose softly patted his back and told him that a samurai shouldn't bow their head so easily. She added that she liked kids who aimed high and assured him it was fine, saying she would help him improve using a special method. He stood up in excitement and asked her if she really meant it, to which she replied yes. She then reminded them that midterms were approaching and said she would help them study. Later in the school library, they sat quietly taking notes. Aimu whisperingly asked the others if they were just studying, and Noro and Yakumo replied that he was right. Rose then loudly shouted at them to stop chatting and explained that the best way to increase stats related to studying, such as logic, language, and knowledge, was through focused studying. She told them that regular tests were important for advancing to a higher class and warned that even if they raised their stats, if their test scores were bad, their evaluations would drop. Aimu thought he could just use rental effort, and Dashoku told him there was a lot of unnecessary effort involved. Still, Aimu understood that if his test scores were bad, there was a chance he wouldn't be able to move up, but with Dashoku's rental effort app, he should be able to advance to E class. Since it wasn't shown in the student handbook, he figured he must still be in F class, and that after the midterms, the results would change, just like when he enrolled. Yakumo then called out to Rose and asked if she knew anything about the special school building where only S-class students could enter. Rose was surprised at Yakumo's question, but then thought for a moment and said she believed it was used for special career guidance for S-class students. However, she added that she wasn't interested in career guidance because she didn't want to work under anyone. Yakumo figured that Rose had never been inside the special school building and thought it was a pity, which confused Noro. Aimu commented that it seemed the only way was to pave their way into the S-class, which gave Yakumo more determination. She responded that they should keep going so they could make it, confusing Noro even more, who was standing between them. Hours later, the study session ended and Rose waved goodbye to them. Noro and Yakumo began to walk away, and just as Aimu was about to follow, Rose called out to him and whispered that what she was about to say was a secret just between the two of them. She told him that if he listened to her request, she would take him to the S-class special school building. Then she pulled back from his ear. Aimu looked at her, confused, wondering why she was choosing him, but he thought it might be better to go along with it. He asked what he needed to do, and Rose thanked him in advance before beginning to explain her request. Later that night, Aimu arrived at the creepy Samishima stationery store. He carefully pushed the door open and entered, wondering if he had the right place. He noticed the store was strange and that there was a scary foreign man inside. He guessed that the man next to him was French. Aimu then showed his Sanzu High School student phone to the man and told him they should exchange pens. The man asked what color, and Aimu replied light gray. The man asked again how thick the ink should be, and Aimu replied that it should be thick and rich. After that, the man signaled for him to follow, and Aimu wondered if he was being told to follow him. They walked behind the store and saw two foreign men talking. Aimu thought that, no matter how he looked at it, the situation seemed suspicious and began to wonder if Rose was actually trying to involve him in something dangerous. His instincts screamed at him not to get involved. But before he could react, a hand suddenly reached from behind and covered his mouth and nose with a handkerchief. He slowly lost consciousness, wondering in horror what was happening. A moment later, he woke up and found himself tied to a chair. He looked around and noticed that he was in a dark, cold place. The room was dusty and dirty, making him wonder if he was in a ruined building. He then remembered that he had been suddenly shoved into a car and had seen two foreign men talking in a different language. He wondered if they were the ones who had kidnapped him and whether they were speaking English. But then he recalled that the password at the entrance had been in French. He knew that the situation was bad because Rose had only taught him the French passphrase, and he had no idea what to do if it was another language. The men then saw him awake and approached him, shouting something he couldn't understand. He panicked as they came closer and wondered if they were angry, especially when the bald man leaned close to his face. He stutteringly told him that he only spoke Japanese, but the bald man slapped him and shouted in French not to try to fool him. The bald man repeatedly punched and slapped him, making him wonder why, all of a sudden, this was happening. He didn't know what they wanted or what he was supposed to say. He knew they couldn't even have a conversation because he didn't understand their language. He also realized that at that rate, he would soon die. Fortunately, he remembered that he could use rental effort to learn a language, but he wondered how, since he couldn't use his phone and didn't know where his belongings were. He then tried to peek around and eventually spotted his bag and phone off to the side. He cursed under his breath, seeing his things so far away, knowing that the men would target the items he needed most. Wondering what to do, he remembered Dashoku and looked around to find him. Dashoku appeared from the wall and sarcastically praised him for noticing. Using telepathy, he asked Dashoku if he was right that he needed to touch his phone and if he could open the rental effort app. Dashoku told him that he was sharp and then took out the phone. He asked what skill Aimu wanted but warned that it would be impossible unless he spoke aloud. Composing himself, Aimu decided to scream even if he died and shouted to the app to give him the French skill, at least enough to hold a casual conversation. The app accepted his request and implanted the French language into his brain. He then heard the bald man asking what was up with him and the blonde man asking what he was shouting about. Aimu was relieved that he could understand them, confirming that their language really was French. The bald man then told the blonde man that Aimu wasn't answering their questions and was just shouting nonsense. The bald man added that Aimu didn't seem to have any useful information, which the blonde man agreed with, visibly annoyed. The blonde man then pulled out a gun and asked if they should just kill Aimu there. Panicking, Aimu shouted to them in French that his mind was still hazy and begged them to ask their questions again, surprising the two men. The blonde man put his gun away and asked what was with him, saying he should have just been honest from the start. The bald man then asked where he had gotten the password. Knowing he needed to choose his words carefully to escape, Aimu replied that he had gotten it from a girl who was his senior at school. The bald man asked what the senior's name was, and Aimu explained that because she was a senior of his friend, he didn't know her personally and had only been told about the password. All he knew was that it sounded like a good part-time job. The bald man then asked what she looked like. Aimu replied that she was beautiful, but her features were so striking that it was hard to describe her, causing Dashoku, who was floating above him, to laugh. The blonde man asked if he was so strapped for cash that he was doing shady part-time work, and Aimu replied that his parents had recently accumulated a huge debt. The blonde man then asked the bald man what he thought. The bald man replied that Aimu didn't seem to be lying. He then asked Aimu if he could recognize the senior by her face, to which Aimu replied yes, saying he believed he would recognize her. The bald man agreed and said that if they knew the name and face, they could just kill him and dispose of the body, but make good use of him in the meantime, since he couldn't escape. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door and shouted that it was time for a shift change. The blonde man asked what shift change, saying he hadn't heard anything about it. The bald man added that their job was done, so it was fine. However, the man outside shouted for them to hurry and switch. The blonde man unlocked the door while sarcastically asking if the guy wanted to torture Aimu or something, joking that he must be a sadist. When the blonde completely opened the door, he saw a terrified man begging them to switch, saying that he would be killed if they didn't. Someone was pointing a gun at him from behind. Both men were shocked and shouted at the mysterious figure, asking who the hell he was. The figure simply told them that there were two of them and asked which one was more important. The blonde man answered that if he had to choose, it would be the bald man. Without hesitation, the figure shot the blonde man in the head, killing him instantly. Aimu, shocked, struggled to believe that what was happening was real. The bald man shouted that the intruder wouldn't get away alive and yelled for help, but the figure calmly replied that it was useless because the only ones still alive were the people in the room. The figure then said he had a question and asked again which one was more important. The bald man claimed it was himself, but the older man shouted that he was the more important one. The figure then asked which of them could get in touch with the sludge organization's executives. The bald man replied that no one could directly contact the executives, and communication was done through a network with many layers. Hearing this, the figure pointed the gun at the bald man's head and stated that it meant they were both equally useless. Without hesitation, he shot the bald man to death. The man being held at gunpoint sobbed in fear. The figure reassured him that he wouldn't kill him, and, when the man was about to ask if he really meant it, wrapped his arms around the man's head and told him that he would be slowly questioned at their organization. Aimu, witnessing everything, trembled with fear. When the figure slowly approached him, Aimu realized the danger and wondered who this person was, who could kill so mercilessly. Closing his eyes, he thought it was hopeless and believed he was going to be killed. The person then aimed the gun at his head and clicked the trigger, but he was confused when nothing happened. Rose then revealed her face, laughingly telling him that she was just kidding because she was out of bullets. He couldn't believe that the savage person was Rose and asked her why she was there and whether he had been killed. She softly touched his lips and told him to calm down. She then explained that the password was a fake one meant to get them inside, which was why she had placed a tracker on him and used him as bait. She showed him the tracker she had removed from his back, making him panic even more and ask when she had put it on him. He then calmed himself and told her that he didn't understand what was going on. He asked her why she would do something like that when she was the leader of one of the 7 great clans and a reliable senior known for her beauty and intelligence. He also asked her what her true identity was. She proudly replied that she was a beautiful spy from the French intelligence agency known as the Directorate General for External Security, leaving him in disbelief that she was a spy. A moment later, after she freed him from the chair and her subordinates arrived to take custody of the last man and search the place, he asked her what would happen to the man now. She replied that her comrades would make sure to extract all the information from him. He then asked her who those men were and if they were terrorists. Apologizing for causing him trouble, she offered to explain as compensation. However, she suddenly aimed her gun at him and reloaded it, asking if she was right in assuming that he understood the consequences if he told anyone. He stutteringly swore that he wouldn't tell anyone. She then smiled brightly and explained that the men were members of an international crime organization called Sludge. They gathered homeless people, young folks, and those who had fallen out of society. She added that Sludge sweet-talked these vulnerable individuals and used them for crimes, making them absolutely awful people. It seemed they manipulated their recruits either through surgical modifications or drugging them, giving them power far beyond their original strength and turning them into incredibly skilled soldiers. Especially in Japan, many graduates from F-class and E-class at Sanzu High School had gone missing, and their whereabouts were unknown. According to the information they had gathered, many of these missing individuals later joined Sludge, which was why she had come to investigate. He told her that he had no idea such a horrible criminal organization existed, but asked if, with such powerful individuals, they wouldn't be able to overthrow a country easily. She replied that, fortunately, their plans hadn't gone smoothly. It seemed that people who were modified often died the next day, startling both him and Dashoku. He then looked at Dashoku, asking silently if what he was thinking was correct. Dashoku confirmed and explained that it meant if they rented out skills that were impossible to repay through rental effort, they could die in the same way. Yet using people like disposable tools wasn't really his style. Rose noticed him quietly staring at her and asked if something was on her face. He snapped out of it and replied no. One of the suited men then approached Rose, and she asked him how the search went. The man replied in French that he had searched the entire building but found no clues that connected to the upper echelons of Sludge. Rose responded in French that she understood but suspected that the people close to the core of Sludge should be nearby. The man told her that it seemed certain and that they might need to investigate the 7 great clans, startling Aimu. He asked if the 7 great clans were connected to the criminal organization, which shocked him even more. The man then asked if Aimu could understand French. Rose replied that it was strange for a Japanese student from F-class to speak French. She then switched to Japanese and asked him if he understood what they had said. He awkwardly replied yes. She sighed in frustration, realizing they had let their guard down, thinking he didn't know French. He explained that it was just a few words he understood, but she replied that it was troublesome and said she couldn't just let him go back easily. He panicked, realizing he might be silenced. Yet, just a moment later, he was sitting on a bouncy soft bed while Rose was in the shower. He stared into space, confused and wondering what he was doing there. Rose then came out of the shower and he looked at her, asking if she was done. He saw her drying her hair with a towel, wearing only a bathrobe, and blushed upon seeing her sexy figure, but managed to ask her what was happening. She replied that he seemed suspicious, so she would monitor him at her house for a while. He was shocked, but she sat down next to him on the bed and told him that she wouldn't let him go home until he told her everything he knew. He immediately crawled backward to get away from her, shouting that if she kept him there, his father would report it. However, she smiled and told him it was okay because they had already informed his father that he was attending a clan training camp, so they should get along. He wondered why this was happening and what he should do. Dashoku then emerged from the ceiling, telling him that it was perfect timing. Aimu told Dashoku not to come out from weird places and asked what he meant. Dashoku reminded him that he had learned French and told him to check the repayment conditions. He immediately took out his phone to check and saw that the repayment condition was living together with a beautiful French woman for 1 week. He wondered what kind of repayment that was and why it was limited to beauties. Dashoku replied that if he studied with a beautiful woman, his motivation and memory would improve significantly. He shouted at Dashoku that he didn't understand, then looked back at Rose, sitting right in front of him, thinking that while it was certainly a convenient turn of events, he wasn't sure if his sanity would hold out living with her for a week. His thoughts trailed off as he drooled, seeing her super sexy appearance in front of him. A few days later, delicious food and drinks were on the table, and Rose was happily eating them. She shouted to him in French that he was a really great cook, and that he was even paying attention to nutrition because the cabbage roll was perfect. He awkwardly laughed and told her that he was glad she liked them, but then she tightly hugged him and told him that she wanted to marry him. He laughed in response to her compliment, knowing that to gain her trust, he had to start with her stomach and show her that he was not a bad person, so he could get released soon. She then told him in French that speaking to her in French every day was pretty unusual, and reminded him in Japanese that she could speak Japanese as well. He responded in French that since it was a good opportunity, he thought it might help him learn French better. She replied that she understood and told him that he was really dedicated to studying. However, the truth was that the repayment conditions required him to live with a beautiful French woman and have conversations in French, though he couldn't exactly admit that. He then thought about the skill he requested to cook cabbage rolls and the repayment conditions, which required reading recipes from a recipe site. It was quite helpful because the repayment progressed just by living together with Rose. This meant he could borrow other skills at the same time and still pay them back. Also, he could improve his cooking skills, which was an easy way to progress, and he assured himself that he would get through the week like that. A moment later, he was walking to school with Rose and caught the attention of the students who saw them together. They whispered, asking if he was Rose's little boyfriend, while others couldn't believe it could happen. He felt awkward with everyone staring at him, but it was clear to him that he and Rose weren't a good match. When he was in his classroom, just seated in his chair, Noro sprinted toward him and asked if it was true that he came out of Rose's house. He was surprised that the information had spread so fast, but calmly replied that he made her breakfast in exchange for learning French. Noro asked what he meant by making breakfast and what exactly it was, then shouted at him that he was basically Rose's boyfriend. He shyly disagreed and explained that it wasn't something like that, but then he felt a cold presence behind him and heard Yakumo asking if it was really not the case, even though they were acting all lovey-dovey. He greeted her with a good morning and asked how he and Rose were acting lovey-dovey, but she simply turned around and said she didn't care. He stared at her, confused, wondering if she was mad, but Noro just sighed and told him that he was so dense. Hours later, he bought pastries and a drink at the nearby mart and was about to leave, but he felt like he had been getting weird stares all day. He guessed it was probably because he had walked to school with Rose. Wanting to eat somewhere quiet, he wondered if he should go to the courtyard. As he was busy walking with his snacks and nearing the courtyard, he heard ladies thrilled and shouting that they looked so good, making him wonder if there were always that many people there. He then saw Rose sitting on a bench with a tall man. The man asked Rose in French if it wasn't great that they were just the two of them having lunch together. She apologized to him and reminded him that she had said several times that she wanted to eat alone. However, the man winked at her, telling her not to be shy, and proudly said he was from the French U18 soccer team and had already been accepted by one of the top teams in League One, while the ladies nearby rooted for them without understanding the conversation. Rose told the man that she wasn't very familiar with soccer. The man responded that he wasn't interested in romance either, but that, as an elite athlete, he faced intense pressure from outside to hook up with a top-tier woman and have a purebred child. He then asked if they wouldn't be perfect partners, making her awkwardly laugh and say he had pretty good jokes. Aimu noticed that Rose was uncomfortable and realized that the man was saying some pretty rude things. He wondered why the ladies around weren't bothered, but then remembered that not everyone understood French and couldn't even notice the sexual harassment. The man then wrapped his arm around her and said it was getting boring, so they should get along. She screamed that it hurt, and before the man could react, Aimu grabbed his shoulder and told him that Rose was in pain. The man immediately stood up and asked him in French who he was, calling him a plain-faced Japanese guy who didn't understand their words. However, Aimu replied in French, quoting the French penal code. The man grabbed Ayumu's collar and asked what he was trying to say, but Aimu simply grabbed the man's arm, forcefully dragged him, and slammed him onto the ground, leaving the man staring at the sky in shock. He then told the man in French that he didn't really want to resort to violence and would be happy if he backed off. He asked if it was possible, and the man immediately stood up and ran away, shouting that he would remember it. The ladies were confused by the fight, but even more shocked to learn that Aimu was fluent in French, and strong too. Rose thanked him, and he warmly replied that she was welcome. Later, after class, they were going home together because they lived together, which made sense to Aimu. Rose thanked him again during the lunch break, and he apologized, wondering if he had done something unnecessary since he was sure she could easily handle that man herself. She responded that she could have done it, but because she was there on a mission, she couldn't cause trouble openly. He understood, realizing that it was the reason she hadn't protested even when hurt, making him think that being a spy wasn't an easy job. Rose then told him that was why she was grateful he helped fend off the man, thanking him for the third time. He responded that he was glad he could help. Suddenly, they heard someone screaming behind them, and when they looked back, they saw a tiger chasing after a man. The men sprinted away in fear, shouting that the tiger must have escaped while being transported to the zoo without caring that they had hit a child and left a little girl sitting alone on the ground. When the tiger approached the girl, Rose immediately grabbed something from her bag and ran toward her, while he also jumped in front of the girl to protect her. He shouted for the little girl to run away, and she thanked him before fleeing. Rose shouted, asking why he was getting in front of the tiger, and he replied that when he saw the girl in danger, his body moved on its own. The tiger walked closer, growling at them like they were food. He shouted for Rose to shoot it quickly, but she hesitated and explained that in her homeland, they were taught to protect animals, so she couldn't harm it. Panicking, he looked at her and asked if it was really the time to say that. He then shouted that he would act as bait so she could run away. The tiger then charged at them, but Rose didn't move. Realizing that while she had honed her skills for justice, she would still be bound by her ideals and possibly die. She thought it was ironic. She questioned herself if it was acceptable as long as it didn't cause harm, but then she was shocked to see Aimu standing in front of her, shielding her with his body. She shouted at him, asking what the hell he was doing, and told him to run, but he didn't. Instead, the tiger leapt at him, only to sit on his lap, purring comfortably and wagging its tail as he patted its head and chin. Rose, along with everyone around them, was shocked and wondered if he had somehow tamed the tiger. Nearby people cheered in relief that they were saved. Rose asked him how and why this happened, and he simply replied that he kind of liked it. The truth, however, was that he had rented the skill to tame a tiger. After he rented the skill, knowledge about taming a tiger rushed into his mind, including how to make slow eye contact to avoid scaring it, how blinking slowly calms them, and that scratching under the chin, an area they can't groom themselves, helps build trust. He realized the tiger was still a cat at heart. He then told Rose that even though he had thought she was scary, she actually protected animals and children, showing she was truly a kind person. She blushed at his compliment and thanked him. A moment later, they arrived safely at Rose's home. He told her that today had really been a disaster, then walked straight to the fridge, saying that even though it was late, he would make dinner. She thanked him in advance and told him that earlier, when he had called her a kind person, she had started to understand him a little. She added that he might have some special power, but he wasn't a bad person, and so there was no longer a need to watch over him. He was now free to do whatever he wanted. He was speechless for a few seconds, then horrified. He immediately bowed down in front of her and begged her to let him stay a little longer, startling her. He knew he still hadn't finished paying back his rented skill, and if he was kicked out now, he would die. Dashoku laughed hard while Aimu explained to Rose that he needed a few more days to study French and still wanted to stay with her. Blushing even more, she agreed to let him stay a little longer. She then hurriedly turned around and said she would take a shower before dinner. As she entered the bathroom, Aimu sighed in relief that his desperate plea had worked. Meanwhile, in the shower, Rose let the water soak her as she thought about how Aimu had looked really cool lately. She wondered what she should do, knowing there were still a few days left before he went home, but feeling like she couldn't stand it any longer. She came up with an idea. A few days later, Aimu and Rose's time living together came to an end. Somehow, Aimu felt that Rose had been acting a bit strange these days, making him wonder if it meant he had earned her trust. They arrived at the special building where only S-class students could enter. Noro asked him how he had convinced Rose, and he replied that he gained her trust little by little. Yakumo then softly punched his side, teasingly asking if he had gotten along with Rose for that reason and praising him for doing a good job. Rose tapped her ID on the building's lock and asked them if they really wanted to see it, warning that there was really nothing inside. He told her that if they didn't at least try going in, it would be pointless. However, they were stunned when the door opened to reveal only a single chair in the middle of a huge white room. Rose guessed that the building might be used for career counseling, even though there was only a chair inside. They walked in and confirmed that the room was completely empty, so empty that it was unsettling. However, Dashoku saw something different, but chose to remain silent. A moment later, after checking out the special building of Sanzu High, they stopped in the cafeteria. Aimu wondered if there really was nothing hidden there. Noro said he had checked every corner but found no strange equipment, just an empty space that felt creepy. Noro then asked if it meant the place itself had no meaning. Yakumo questioned what had happened to her sister, prompting Aimu to conclude that there was no other choice. They would have to check it out themselves by becoming S-class students. He informed them that doing their best on the regular test would be the first step, and Noro and Yakumo agreed, while Dashoku floated nearby, quietly listening. A few minutes later, Aimu went to the library, knowing that besides studying for the test, he also needed to fulfill his repayment condition, reading an animal encyclopedia for 15 days, 1 hour a day, to repay the skill he rented to tame a tiger. He searched the shelves and eventually found the encyclopedia. Just as he was about to stand up, someone shouted for him to look out. When he looked up, he was shocked to see a lady falling from a ladder.